The fluorescent lights in conference room B hummed like angry wasps as I sat across from 3 suits who'd already decided my fate. Hayes Rellin, 39 years old, about to become unemployed in the most humiliating way possible. "Hayes, we're restructuring the IT department," said Janet from HR, her voice carrying all the warmth of a parking meter. "Your position has been eliminated." Marlow Trasker, VP of Operations, leaned back in his leather chair with practiced sympathy. "We really appreciate everything you've done for the company, buddy. This isn't personal." Buddy. Right. Nothing personal about the man who'd been eyeing my wife for months finally getting me out of the picture. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice level. "When's my last day?" "Today, actually," Janet replied, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Security will escort you out after you sign these papers." I glanced at the severance package. 2 weeks' pay, 12 years with the company, and they were tossing me out like yesterday's coffee grounds. Marlow's fake concerned expression made my stomach turn, but I just nodded and signed where they pointed. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box containing my desk plant, a coffee mug, and a picture of Kalia from our honeymoon. The security guard who'd walked me out actually looked embarrassed. "Sorry, man," he muttered before heading back inside. I drove home to our modest suburban house, the same one Kalia had been complaining about for the past 2 years. "When are we going to get a real place, Hayes? Something that doesn't scream middle management failure." Her words echoed in my head as I pulled into the driveway. The house was empty. Kalia wouldn't be home from her HR manager job for another 3 hours. I set my box on the kitchen counter and opened a beer, trying to figure out how to break the news to my wife that her already disappointing husband had just become completely worthless. That's when I heard her voice coming from upstairs. She was home early, talking on the phone in our bedroom. I started up the stairs to tell her about my day, but her words stopped me cold. "No, Marlow, he doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. "Hayes is too wrapped up in his little computer projects to notice what's right in front of him." I froze on the landing, my hand gripping the banister. "I know, baby, I know. Just a few more weeks, and I'll have everything sorted out. The divorce papers are already drawn up." She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard her make in months. "Trust me, he won't fight it. Hayes never fights for anything." My legs felt like rubber, but I managed to back down the stairs without making a sound. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the cardboard box, while my 12-year marriage crumbled around me like a house of cards in a hurricane. The family iPad was sitting on the counter, still logged into Kalia's messages. I'd never been the type to snoop, but today seemed like a good day to start. What I found made my fired status seem like winning the lottery by comparison. Months of text exchanges between my wife and my former boss, pictures I won't describe, plans for romantic getaways. And the real kicker? I'd trade Hayes for anyone with a real paycheck. At least you know how to treat a woman right. I closed the iPad and finished my beer. Then I opened another one. An hour later, Kalia walked through the front door, all smiles and fake concern. "Hey, honey, you're home early. How was work?" "Interesting day," I said. "Got fired." Her smile faltered for exactly 2 seconds before she rearranged her features into what she probably thought was supportive wife mode. "Oh, Hayes, I'm so sorry. What happened?" "Restructuring." Marlow was very apologetic about the whole thing. She actually flinched when I said his name. "Well, I'm sure something else will come along. You're very capable." The word hung in the air like a wet blanket. Capable. Not talented, not brilliant, not even good at what I do. Capable. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure something will come along." That evening, I met my best friend Devin at Murphy's Tavern, the kind of dive bar where the peanuts are free and the advice comes whether you want it or not. Devin was an ex-cop who'd started his own security consulting business, and he had the kind of street smarts that my suburban life had never required. "So, let me get this straight," he said after I'd laid out my spectacular day. "Your wife is having an affair with the guy who just fired you, and she's planning to divorce you. That about covers it. And you're sitting here drinking beer instead of burning their world down? What am I supposed to do, Devin? I'm unemployed. She's got a steady job and a lawyer boyfriend with connections. I've got nothing." Devin shook his head. "Hayes, you've always been too nice for your own good. Sometimes nice guys don't finish last because they're not good enough. They finish last because they don't know how to play the game." Before I could respond, 2 women walked into the bar. I recognized them immediately. Tanya and Laura, Kalia's work friends and partners in gossip. They didn't notice us in our corner booth, but their voices carried across the room like air raid sirens. I can't believe Kalia is finally going through with it, Tanya was saying as they settled at the bar. She's been complaining about Hayes for years. About time, Lara replied. Marlow's got money, ambition, and from what Kalia says, he knows how to keep a woman satisfied. My face burned, but Devon put a hand on my arm to keep me seated. She said Hayes hasn't touched her in months, Tanya continued. Just sits around playing video games and watching TV. Marlow takes her to nice restaurants, buys her jewelry, makes her feel special. Plus, he's getting promoted next month. Vice President of Operations to Senior VP. Kalia will finally have the lifestyle she deserves. They kept talking, sharing details about my failing marriage that I hadn't even known myself. How Kalia had been planning this for months. How she'd already picked out a new apartment with Marlow. How she was going to take me for everything I was worth in the divorce. The best part, Lara said with a giggle, is that Hayes has no idea. Kalia says he's so clueless he probably won't even see it coming. Devon and I finished our drinks in silence and left before I did something stupid. In the parking lot, he turned to me with the kind of serious expression he used to wear when he was about to arrest someone. Hayes, you're my friend, so I'm going to tell you something important. Right now, you're a victim. Tomorrow, you can choose to be something else. Well, like what? Like someone who doesn't let people walk all over him, like someone who fights back. I drove home to find Kalia packing a suitcase. She didn't even try to hide it. Going somewhere? I asked. Business trip, she said without looking up. 3 days in Chicago. Another lie to add to the collection. I sat on the bed and watched her fold clothes with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for a long time. Kalia, is there anything you want to tell me? She finally looked at me, and for a split second I saw something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly, replaced by the cold indifference I'd been seeing more and more lately. Like what? Like the fact that you're leaving me for Marlow. Her hands stopped moving. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I don't know what you're talking about, she said finally. I saw the messages. I heard your phone call. I know about the divorce papers. She straightened up, and the mask finally came off. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I'd married 12 years ago. This was someone harder, colder, more calculating. Fine, she said. Yes, I'm leaving you. Yes, I'm with Marlow, and yes, I'm filing for divorce. Why? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Why? Hayes, look around. Look at this house. Look at your job. Look at your life. I'm 37 years old, and I'm married to a man who's going nowhere. Marlow offers me a future. You offer me... What? More years of mediocrity? I thought we were happy. You were happy. I was settling. She zipped up the suitcase and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. I'll be back for the rest of my things next week. Try not to make this harder than it has to be. The front door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire house. I sat there on the bed, surrounded by the debris of my marriage, and tried to figure out what came next. That's when Devon called. Hayes, you need to get down to Morrison and Associates law office right now. Why? Because apparently your Uncle Frank left you something in his will, and the lawyer's been trying to reach you for weeks. Your mail's been getting forwarded to some old address. Uncle Frank. My dad's brother, the one who disappeared to Montana 20 years ago to prospect for gold and never came back. The family eccentric who'd sent Christmas cards with no return address and called once a year to talk about mineral rights and government conspiracies. What did he leave me? I don't know, but the lawyer sounded excited. Said it was urgent. I looked around the empty house, at the cardboard box still sitting on the kitchen counter, at the life that had just imploded around me. I'll be right there. As I grabbed my keys, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time in 12 hours, I was smiling. Turns out, I said to my reflection, the only thing better than irony is timing. Morrison and Associates occupied the kind of old brick building that screamed serious money and established reputation. The receptionist led me to a conference room where a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s was waiting with a stack of papers and an expression that suggested she'd been having a very good day. Mr. Rellin, I'm Gina Morrison. I've been handling your uncle's estate. Please, sit down. She slid a folder across the mahogany table. Your Uncle Frank was quite the character. Spent 20 years in Montana, mostly keeping to himself, but apparently he was very good at finding things. Things? Gold, Mr. Rellin. Lots of it. plus some very smart investments in mining rights and real estate. She opened the folder. Your uncle left you everything. The total value of the estate is approximately $2.8 million. The room went quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning. I stared at the papers, trying to process what she'd just said. I'm sorry. How much? $2.8 million. After taxes and fees, you're looking at about $2.1 million in liquid assets, plus the Montana property. I leaned back in the leather chair, feeling like someone had just hit me with a baseball bat made of good news. There is one condition, Gina continued. Your uncle was very specific about discretion. He didn't trust banks, governments, or family members who might make poor decisions with sudden wealth. His words, not mine. She pulled out another document. He set up a series of shell companies and trusts. Everything can be managed quietly, with your name kept off most of the paperwork. He seemed to think you might need that kind of flexibility someday. Uncle Frank, the paranoid prospector, had just handed me the keys to a very different kind of future. What kind of flexibility? Gina smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. The kind that lets you buy property, start businesses, and make investments without anyone knowing you're the one behind it. Your uncle was very thorough. 2 hours later, I walked out of Morrison & Associates with a new bank account, a handful of business cards, and a completely different perspective on my situation. Devin was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck with the kind of grin that meant trouble. So? He asked. So I'm not as poor as I was this morning. How not poor? Rich enough to make some people very uncomfortable. Devin's grin got wider. Now we're talking. What's the plan? I looked back at the law office, then at the city skyline where Marlow and Kelia were probably celebrating their brilliant scheme. First, I need to know everything about Marlow Trasker. His business, his finances, his weaknesses, everything. I can handle that. What else? Then I'm going to buy some real estate. The next morning, I was sitting in a coffee shop across from Pinnacle Properties, watching Marlow's company through the window while Devin made phone calls. My former boss was probably inside right now, telling people how sorry he was about having to let me go, while planning his next romantic getaway with my wife. Devin slid into the booth across from me with a folder full of information. Your boy Marlow is leveraged up to his eyeballs, he said. Big house with a bigger mortgage, fancy car payments, and a lifestyle that barely fits his current salary. He's counting on that promotion to senior VP to keep him afloat. What about the business? Pinnacle Properties manages about 40 commercial buildings around the city. Their biggest client is Midwest Manufacturing, and they're completely dependent on a warehouse contract that comes up for renewal next month. I sipped my coffee and watched people walking into the building. What warehouse? Devin slid a photograph across the table. Industrial complex on the south side. Midwest Manufacturing has been leasing it for 5 years, but the current owner is looking to sell. How much? $400,000. I smiled. Make an offer. While Devin handled the real estate purchase, I spent the afternoon setting up my new life. Gina had been right about Uncle Frank's paranoia paying off. The shell companies were works of art, layered and complex enough to hide my involvement in anything I wanted to do. By evening, I owned the warehouse that Midwest Manufacturing was renting. By the next morning, I'd hired a building inspector who found several serious safety violations that would require immediate attention. I was having breakfast at a diner near Pinnacle Properties when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marlow's office number. Hayes, it's Marlow. Look, I know this is awkward, but I need to ask you about the Midwest Manufacturing account. What about it? Did you leave any documentation about their warehouse lease? We're having some issues with the property owner, and I can't find the files. I almost laughed. Sorry, Marlow. Security packed up my desk pretty quickly. I didn't get a chance to organize anything. Right. Well, if you remember anything that might help, I'll be sure to let you know. I hung up and walked across the street to watch the chaos through Pinnacle's lobby windows. Marlow was pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly while talking on his phone. Other employees were running around with papers and worried expressions. My phone buzzed with a text from Kelia. Heard about your job. Sorry it didn't work out. We should talk soon about our situation. Our situation. Like our marriage was a business problem that needed to be resolved efficiently. I typed back, no rush. Take all the time you need. That afternoon, the warehouse owner, officially a company called Mountain West Holdings, unofficially me, sent Midwest Manufacturing a letter. The lease renewal would require a 600% increase in monthly rent, plus immediate compliance with all safety regulations. Midwest Manufacturing, understandably, decided to find a new warehouse. Marlow's phone started ringing at 3:47 p.m. I know because I was sitting in the coffee shop watching him through the window when he took the call. Even from across the street, I could see his face go pale. Devin joined me an hour later with an update. Midwest Manufacturing just terminated their contract with Pinnacle Properties, something about the property management company being unable to guarantee suitable facilities. That's unfortunate. Gets better. Midwest Manufacturing represents about 30% of Pinnacle's revenue. Without that contract, they're going to have to make some serious cuts. Like what kind of cuts? Like the kind that might affect certain vice presidents who were counting on promotions. I finished my coffee and stood up. Phase 1 complete. Time for Phase 2. Which is? Making sure Kalia understands exactly what kind of man she's chosen to build her future with. That evening, I drove to the upscale apartment complex where Kalia and Marlow had set up their love nest. Devin had provided the address, along with some interesting details about the lease agreement. The building was one of those modern glass and steel towers that screamed, successful urban professionals. The kind of place Kalia had always wanted to live, with a doorman and a fitness center and rent that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. I parked across the street and called the building management company. Hi, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I'm calling about the lease for apartment 1247. My client has some concerns about the financial qualifications of the tenants. 20 minutes later, I had a copy of the lease application. Marlow had listed his Pinnacle Properties salary as $180,000 per year, with an expected increase to $220,000 upon his upcoming promotion. The promotion that was no longer coming, I made some more phone calls. By morning, the building management would have a very different picture of Marlow Trasker's financial stability. My phone rang as I was driving home. Kalia. Hayes, we need to talk. About what? About us. About the divorce. I think we should handle this like adults. I agree completely. When did you want to discuss it? Tomorrow evening? I could come by the house. Sure, I'll be home after 6. Good. And Hayes? I hope we can keep this civilized, for both our sakes. I hung up and smiled. Civilized. That was exactly what I had in mind. The next day brought more good news. Devin called with an update on Marlow's situation. Your boy's having a rough week. Lost the Midwest Manufacturing contract, got called into a meeting with the senior partners, and apparently his fancy apartment lease is under review. Review? Building management got an anonymous tip about potential income discrepancies. They're requiring additional financial documentation before they'll approve the lease renewal next month. How unfortunate. Also, and this is interesting, someone reported his car for blocking a fire hydrant yesterday. Got towed from outside his office building. I hadn't arranged that one, but I wasn't going to complain about good luck. What about Kalia? She's been asking around about divorce lawyers, expensive ones. That evening, Kalia showed up at the house right on time. She looked tired, stressed, and not quite as confident as she'd been when she walked out 3 days earlier. Thanks for agreeing to meet, she said, settling into the living room chair she'd always preferred. I know this is difficult. Not as difficult as I expected. She looked surprised. Really? Really. I've had some time to think, and I realize you're right. We want different things. You want a successful man with money and ambition. I want a wife who doesn't lie to me for months while planning to destroy my life. Her face flushed. Hayes, I never wanted to hurt you. Just leave me, take half my assets, and move in with my former boss. Nothing hurtful about that. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. How was it supposed to happen? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I don't know. I felt trapped, like my life was going nowhere. So you decided to go somewhere else? Yes, I nodded. I understand, and I'm not going to fight the divorce. She looked up, surprised again. You're not? Nope. You can have the house, the car, whatever you want. I'm not interested in dragging this out. That's very generous. I'm a generous guy, always have been. She stood up, looking relieved and maybe a little guilty. I should go. Marlow's having a difficult time at work, and I want to be supportive. Of course, that's what partners do. At the door, she turned back. Hayes, I hope you know that I did love you. Once? I know, and I hope you know that I'm going to be just fine. After she left, I poured myself a drink and called Gina Morrison. How quickly can we set up a property management company? How quickly do you need it? Tomorrow. Consider it done? I hung up and looked around the house that Kalia had never thought was good enough. Tomorrow she was going to start learning about the difference between what she wanted and what she could actually have. And Marlow was going to discover that some people, when pushed far enough, push back. The next morning brought the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you feel like anything is possible. I was having coffee on the back deck when Devin called with news that made the day even brighter. "Your girlfriend's boyfriend is having a really bad week," he said without preamble. "How bad?" "Lost the Midwest manufacturing contract, got passed over for the promotion, and now the building management company is asking some very uncomfortable questions about his lease application." "That does sound stressful." "Gets better. Pinnacle Properties is restructuring. 3 guesses who's at the top of the list for downsizing." I set down my coffee cup. "Marlow?" "The partners had a meeting yesterday. Word is they're looking at eliminating his position entirely." This was moving faster than I'd expected. "What about Kalia?" "She doesn't know yet. Still thinks her meal ticket is getting promoted next month." After hanging up with Devin, I called Gina Morrison to check on the property management company we'd set up. Mountain Ridge Property Services was officially in business, with me as the silent owner and a very competent management team handling the day-to-day operations. "We've acquired 4 more properties in the downtown area," Gina reported, "including the building where Pinnacle Properties has their offices." "Perfect. What's their lease situation?" "Month to month, with a rate that's been locked in for 3 years, well below current market value." "I think it's time for a market adjustment." "How much of an adjustment?" "Enough to get their attention." By noon, Pinnacle Properties had received notice that their office rent was increasing by 400%, effective immediately. The building's new management company cited rising property values and increased maintenance costs. I was having lunch at a restaurant across from their building when I saw Marlow storm out of the lobby, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing angrily at the sky. Even from a distance, I could tell he was having the kind of conversation that ends with someone getting fired. My phone buzzed with a text from Kalia. "Can we talk? Something's happened." I texted back, "Of course. What's wrong?" "Marlow's having problems at work. I'm worried." "I'm sure it will work out. Can I call you later?" "Any time." I finished my lunch and walked across the street to the building lobby. The security guard was someone I recognized from my old job, a guy named Pete who'd always been friendly. "Hey, Hayes, what brings you downtown?" "Just taking care of some business. How's everything here?" Pete shook his head. "Crazy day. The property management company got bought out, and now everyone's scrambling about rent increases. The folks upstairs are not happy." "Upstairs?" "Pinnacle Properties. Their rent just went through the roof. Word is they might have to move." "That's tough." "Yeah, especially with all the other problems they've been having. Lost some big client last week, and now this." I expressed appropriate sympathy and headed back to my car. Phase 2 was proceeding nicely. That afternoon, I decided it was time to make my presence known. I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to job interviews and important meetings back when I thought climbing the corporate ladder mattered, and drove to Pinnacle Properties. The receptionist didn't recognize me, which wasn't surprising since I'd only been to Marlow's office a few times over the years. "I'd like to speak with Marlow Trasker," I said. "It's about the Midwest manufacturing account." "Are you with Midwest Manufacturing?" "I'm a consultant, Hayes Rellin." She made a call, and a few minutes later Marlow appeared in the lobby. He looked like he'd been having the kind of week that ages you 5 years in 5 days. "Hayes, what are you doing here?" "I heard about the Midwest manufacturing situation. Thought I might be able to help." His expression shifted from confusion to suspicion to desperate hope in the span of about 3 seconds. "Help how?" "I still have some contacts in the industry. Maybe I could make some calls, see if there's a way to salvage the relationship." For a moment, I thought he might actually cry with relief. That would be amazing. Do you want to come up to my office?" "Sure." The elevator ride was awkward. Marlow kept glancing at me like he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap, but his desperation was stronger than his suspicion. His office was smaller than I'd expected, with the kind of generic corporate furniture that screams middle management. The window looked out at the parking lot where I'd been escorted to my car just a week earlier. "So," he said, settling behind his desk, "what exactly did you have in mind?" "Well, first I'd need to understand what went wrong. From what I heard, it was something about the warehouse lease?" Marlow's face darkened. The property owner came out of nowhere with these ridiculous demands. 600% rent increase, immediate safety upgrades. The whole thing was clearly designed to force Midwest manufacturing out. "That does sound suspicious. Who's the property owner?" "Some company called Mountain West Holdings. Never heard of them before, but they bought the warehouse right before the lease renewal came up." I nodded sympathetically. "Sounds like someone who knew exactly what they were doing." "Exactly. The whole thing feels personal, you know, like someone had it out for us specifically." "I can see why you'd think that." We talked for another 20 minutes, with Marlow growing more animated as he described his theories about corporate sabotage and unfair business practices. I made appropriate noises of agreement and promised to make some calls. "Hayes, I have to ask," he said as I was getting ready to leave. "Why are you helping me? I mean, after what happened with your job?" "Water under the bridge," I said. "Besides, we're both professionals. Personal feelings shouldn't interfere with business." He actually looked grateful. "I really appreciate this. And Hayes, I'm sorry about how things went down last week. The decision came from upstairs, you know? It wasn't my call." "I understand completely." I left Pinnacle Properties feeling better than I had in weeks. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone dig their own grave while thanking you for handing them the shovel. That evening, Kalia called as promised. "Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Always." "Are you doing anything to hurt Marlow's business?" The question caught me off guard, not because I wasn't expecting it, but because of how directly she'd asked it. "Why would you think that?" "Because everything started falling apart right after he fired you. The timing seems coincidental." "Kalia, I've been unemployed for a week. What exactly do you think I could do to a company like Pinnacle Properties?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. It just feels like too much bad luck all at once." "Sometimes that's how life works. You should know that better than anyone." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that we've both had our share of surprises lately." "Hayes, if you're doing something..." "I'm not doing anything except trying to figure out what comes next for me, just like you did." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning brought more good news. Devin called with an update that made my coffee taste even better than usual. Marlow got fired yesterday afternoon. Pinnacle Properties is officially restructuring, and his position was eliminated. "How's he taking it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Building security had to escort him out after he started yelling at the senior partners." "And Kalia?" "That's the interesting part. She showed up at his apartment last night, and according to my source in the building, there was a lot of screaming." "About what?" "Money. Apparently she just found out that Marlow's been living paycheck to paycheck, and now he doesn't have a paycheck." I leaned back in my kitchen chair and smiled. That must have been an enlightening conversation. Gets better. The building management company rejected their lease renewal. Something about insufficient income verification. Where are they going to live? That's the million-dollar question. Marlow's house is mortgaged to the hilt, and Kalaya's been planning to leave you, so she doesn't exactly have a backup plan. Sounds like they'll figure something out. They're both very resourceful people. "Hayes? Yeah? You're starting to scare me a little bit. Why?" "Because a week ago you were the nicest guy I knew, and now you're systematically destroying two people's lives while drinking coffee and making small talk." I considered that for a moment. "Devin, a week ago I thought I was married to someone who loved me and worked for people who valued my contributions. Turns out I was wrong about both of those things." "So this is revenge?" "This is education. I'm teaching some people about the consequences of their choices." "And when does the education end?" "When they've learned everything I think they need to know." That afternoon, I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I drove to the apartment complex where Kalia and Marlow had been living and waited in the parking lot. They emerged around 3 o'clock, both looking like they'd been through a blender. Marlow was carrying a suitcase and what appeared to be a box of personal items. Kalia was walking beside him with the kind of rigid posture that suggested she was barely holding herself together. I rolled down my window as they approached their car. "Hey there, moving day?" They both froze. Kalia recovered first. "Hayes, what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd see how you two were settling in." Marlow set down his suitcase and walked toward my car with the kind of aggressive swagger that men use when they're trying to hide the fact that their world is falling apart. "You need to leave," he said. "This is harassment." "Actually, this is a public parking lot, but I understand you're having a stressful day." "You think this is funny?" "I think it's educational." He leaned down toward my window, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to start a physical confrontation, but Kalia grabbed his arm. "Marlow, don't. Let's just go." "Go where?" I asked pleasantly. "I heard about the lease situation. That's really unfortunate." Kalia's face went white. "How did you—" "Small world. People talk." Marlow straightened up, his hands clenched into fists. "If you're behind this—" "Behind what? Your company losing clients? Your landlord raising the rent? Your boss deciding you're not worth keeping around?" I shrugged. "Sounds like a run of bad luck to me." "This isn't over," he said. "You're absolutely right about that." I drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot with their suitcases and their rapidly diminishing options. In my rearview mirror, I could see them having what appeared to be a very animated discussion. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. Gina Morrison. "We have a problem," she said. "Kalia filed for spousal support this morning. She's claiming you've been hiding assets and demanding an emergency hearing." "On what grounds?" "She says you've been making suspicious financial moves since she left, and she's concerned you're trying to hide money to avoid paying support." I sat in my car, thinking. Kalia was smarter than I'd given her credit for. She'd figured out that something was different about my situation, even if she didn't know exactly what. Can she prove anything? Not with the way we've structured everything, but she's hired a good lawyer, and they're going to make noise. Let them make noise. In the meantime, I think it's time to accelerate our timeline. What did you have in mind? I want to buy Pinnacle Properties. The whole company? The whole company. There was a pause. Hayes, that's going to cost serious money, and it's going to be very difficult to keep your involvement quiet. How much money? Based on their current financial situation, probably around $1.2 million. Do it. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. And Gina, make sure the sale goes through before Kalia's hearing. Why? Because I want to be in a position to offer Marlow his job back. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday morning in Judge Patricia Hendricks's courtroom. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase that contained enough documentation to bury Kalia's claims under an avalanche of legitimate paperwork. Kalia's lawyer was a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca Stone, who had a reputation for taking wealthy husbands to the cleaners. She looked confident as she arranged her files, probably expecting to steamroll the unemployed husband with the modest suburban lifestyle. Gina Morrison sat beside me, equally well-dressed, but with the kind of calm demeanor that comes from holding all the good cards. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Hendricks entered the courtroom. Rebecca Stone stood up first. "Your Honor, my client Kalia Rellin is seeking emergency spousal support and an injunction preventing her husband from hiding or transferring marital assets." "On what grounds?" Judge Hendricks asked. "Mr. Rellin has been making suspicious financial moves since my client initiated divorce proceedings. We believe he's attempting to conceal assets to avoid his support obligations." Judge Hendricks looked at me. "Mr. Rellin, how do you respond?" I stood up. "Your Honor, I've made no attempt to hide anything. All of my financial activities have been completely legal and properly documented." "Can you explain these suspicious activities?" Gina Morrison stood and handed a stack of papers to the bailiff. "Your Honor, Mr. Rellin recently inherited a substantial sum from his uncle's estate. All transactions have been handled through legitimate legal channels, with proper documentation and tax filings." Rebecca Stone looked like someone had just slapped her. "Your Honor, we weren't aware of any inheritance." "That's because it occurred after your client left Mr. Rellin," Gina replied smoothly. "The inheritance has no bearing on marital assets or support obligations." Judge Hendricks reviewed the documents for several minutes while the courtroom sat in silence. Kalia kept glancing at me with an expression that was part confusion, part anger, and part something that might have been fear. "Ms. Stone," the judge finally said, "your client's petition is based on the assumption that Mr. Rellin is hiding marital assets. However, the documentation clearly shows that the inheritance occurred after the separation, making it separate property. Your Honor, the timing seems very convenient." "The timing is irrelevant. The law is clear." Judge Hendricks looked at Kalia. "Mrs. Rellin, you left your husband for another man, initiated divorce proceedings, and are now seeking support from assets that weren't acquired during the marriage. Your petition is denied." Rebecca Stone tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, my client gave up career opportunities to support her husband's ambitions. She deserves consideration." "She deserves exactly what the law provides, which in this case is very little." The judge's tone suggested she'd seen this kind of case before and wasn't impressed. "Mr. Rellin, you're under no obligation to provide support beyond what's required by statute." As we filed out of the courtroom, Kalia grabbed my arm in the hallway. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked. "Enough. Hayes, we were married for 12 years. That has to count for something." "It does count for something. It counts as 12 years of my life that I'll never get back." Her face crumpled. "I never meant for things to happen this way." "But they did happen this way, and now we both have to live with the consequences." I walked away, leaving her standing in the courthouse hallway with her expensive lawyer and her rapidly diminishing options. That afternoon, I met Devin at Murphy's Tavern to celebrate. The same bar where I'd learned about Kalia's affair was now the site of toasting her legal defeat. "So what's next?" Devin asked, raising his beer. Next, I become Marlow's new boss. Come again? Gina finalized the purchase of Pinnacle Properties this morning. I now own the company that fired me. Devin nearly choked on his beer. You bought the whole company? Lock, stock, and barrel. The previous owners were very motivated to sell. What are you going to do with it? Run it better than they did, and make some personnel changes. Like firing Marlow? Like hiring him back. Devin stared at me. You want to explain that logic? Marlow needs a job. He's got bills to pay, an image to maintain, and a girlfriend who's starting to realize that unemployed men don't make good sugar daddies. So, you're going to rescue him? I'm going to give him exactly what he deserves. Monday morning, I walked into the Pinnacle Properties office building as the new owner. The staff had been told that the company had been acquired by Mountain Ridge Property Services, but they didn't know who was behind the acquisition. I'd spent the weekend reviewing personnel files and financial records. Pinnacle Properties was actually a decent company that had been poorly managed by people who cared more about their own advancement than about building a sustainable business. The first order of business was a staff meeting in the main conference room, the same room where I'd been fired 2 weeks earlier. Good morning, everyone, I said, standing at the head of the table where Marlow used to sit. I'm Hayes Rellin, and I'm the new owner of this company. The silence was deafening. Janet from HR looked like she'd seen a ghost. The other employees were glancing at each other with expressions ranging from confusion to panic. I know this is unexpected, I continued, but I want to assure everyone that my goal is to make this company more successful, not to settle personal scores. That was mostly true. However, there will be some changes. We're going to focus on client service, ethical business practices, and treating our employees with respect. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. Anyone who's committed to those principles will find this a good place to work. Anyone who isn't can start looking for other opportunities. After the meeting, I called Janet into my office. I assume you have questions, I said. A few, she replied carefully. Ask away. Are you going to fire everyone who was involved in your termination? That depends. Do you think my termination was handled properly? She was quiet for a moment. Honestly, no. The decision was made for personal reasons, not business ones. Whose personal reasons? Marlow's. He wanted you gone, and he pressured the senior partners to make it happen. Why? I think you know why. I nodded. Janet, you've been here for 8 years. You're good at your job, and you've always been professional with me. I have no intention of firing you. She looked relieved. Thank you. But I am going to ask you to do something that might make you uncomfortable. What? I want you to call Marlow and offer him his old job back. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? Completely serious. Same salary, same responsibilities, same office. Why? Because I think he's learned some valuable lessons over the past 2 weeks, and I believe in second chances. That was complete nonsense, but it sounded good. Janet made the call that afternoon. According to her report, Marlow was so surprised he actually dropped the phone. But he accepted the offer immediately. He started back to work on Wednesday morning, looking like a man who'd been given an unexpected reprieve from execution. I watched from my office window as he got out of his car and walked toward the building, probably trying to figure out how his luck had suddenly changed. I gave him an hour to settle in before visiting his office. Marlow, I said, knocking on his open door. Welcome back. He looked up from his desk with an expression that was part gratitude, part confusion, and part terror. Hayes, Thank you for the job. I know this must be awkward. Not awkward at all. We're both professionals. Right, professional. I sat down in the chair across from his desk. I wanted to talk to you about your first assignment. Of course, whatever you need. I want you to rebuild our relationship with Midwest Manufacturing. His face went pale. Hayes, I don't think that's possible. They were pretty angry when they terminated the contract. I'm sure they were, but I have confidence in your ability to smooth things over. How am I supposed to do that? The warehouse situation was a disaster. Well, here's the interesting thing about that. It turns out the new property owner is willing to negotiate. Really? Really. In fact, I think you'll find them very reasonable to work with. I stood up to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Marlow? The property owner specifically requested that you handle the negotiations personally. They were impressed with your professionalism during the initial discussions. After I left his office, I called Devin. Phase 3 is officially underway, I said. Which is? Watching Marlow try to negotiate a new warehouse lease with himself? You're not going to tell him you own the warehouse. Eventually. But first, I want to see how hard he's willing to work to fix the mess he thinks someone else created. Hayes, you realize this is getting pretty elaborate, right? At some point, you might want to consider just moving on with your life. I am moving on with my life. I'm just taking some people along for the ride. That evening, Kalia called. She sounded tired and stressed. Hayes, I need to ask you for a favor. What kind of favor? Marlow got his job back, but we're still in a difficult situation financially. The apartment thing fell through, and we're staying in a motel right now. That sounds uncomfortable. It is. Look, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but could we stay at the house for a few weeks, just until we get back on our feet? I almost laughed out loud. You want to move back in with me? With your boyfriend? Just temporarily. We could pay rent. Kalia, do you understand how insane that sounds? I know it's awkward, but we don't have anywhere else to go, and the house is big enough. The house that wasn't good enough for you 2 weeks ago? Hayes, please, I'm asking for help. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. You made your choice, Kalia. Now you get to live with it. But nothing. You wanted a different life with a successful man who could give you everything you deserved. How's that working out for you? She hung up without answering. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find Marlow already at his desk, working on what appeared to be a presentation. He looked up when I walked by his office. Hayes, do you have a minute? I've been working on the Midwest manufacturing proposal. Sure. He spread out charts and graphs across his desk with the enthusiasm of someone who desperately needs to prove their value. I think I've found a way to make this work, he said. If we can get the warehouse lease back to reasonable terms, and if we can guarantee certain service levels, I believe Midwest Manufacturing might be willing to reconsider. That sounds promising. What kind of terms are you thinking? Well, the original lease was $8,000 per month. The new owner wanted $48,000, which was obviously impossible. But if we could get them down to, say, $12,000, that might be workable. Have you contacted the property owner? I've been trying. Mountain West Holdings is hard to reach, but I left several messages. I nodded thoughtfully. Keep trying. I have a good feeling about this. That afternoon, Marlow received a call from Mountain West Holdings. The property manager was willing to meet with him to discuss terms. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon at the warehouse. I arrived early and waited in the property manager's office, watching through the window as Marlow's car pulled into the parking lot. He walked into the building looking nervous but determined, carrying his presentation materials and wearing his most professional expression. Mr. Trasker, the property manager said, thank you for coming. I understand you'd like to discuss lease terms for the Midwest Manufacturing account. That's right. I believe we can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone. I hope so. Let me get the owner on the phone. He likes to be personally involved in these negotiations. Marlow nodded eagerly as the property manager dialed my number. Mr. Rellin, I have Mr. Trasker here to discuss the warehouse lease. I walked out of the back office, and the expression on Marlow's face was worth every penny I'd spent on this elaborate setup. Hello, Marlow, I said. I understand you'd like to negotiate a lease. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You, he finally managed. You own the warehouse. I own the warehouse, I own your company, and I own this conversation. So let's talk about terms. Marlow sat frozen in his chair, staring at me like I just told him the laws of physics had been repealed. The property manager excused himself, leaving us alone in the warehouse office with nothing but the sound of rain starting to patter against the windows. You, Marlow said again, apparently having trouble with more complex sentences. Me, I confirmed, settling into the chair across from him. Surprise. The warehouse, the company, the apartment building. His voice trailed off as the pieces started falling into place. All me. Well, technically various shell companies and investment trusts, but yes, all me. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. How long? How long what? How long have you been planning this? I wasn't planning anything, Marlow. I was just reacting. You fired me, so I bought your company. You stole my wife, so I made sure you couldn't afford to keep her. You humiliated me, so I returned the favor. This is insane. This is business. You should understand that. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the rain was getting heavier, and the parking lot was starting to flood in the low spots. What do you want? He asked without turning around. I want you to understand something. For 12 years, I was the nice guy. The one who didn't make waves, didn't fight back, didn't stand up for himself. You and Kalia saw that as weakness. I stood up and walked to the other window, so we were facing each other across the small office. But here's what you didn't understand. I wasn't weak. I was just content. I had a wife I loved, a job that paid the bills, a life that worked. I didn't need more because I was happy with what I had. Hayes, but you took that away from me, both of you. You decided that what I had wasn't worth respecting, that who I was wasn't worth considering. So now you get to see what I'm like when I'm not content. Marlow turned away from the window. So what happens now? You've destroyed my career, my relationship, my life. Are you satisfied? I haven't destroyed anything, Marlow. I've just removed the artificial supports that were keeping your life propped up. Your career was built on taking credit for other people's work. Your relationship was built on lies and betrayal. Your lifestyle was built on debt and expectations. I walked back to the desk and picked up his presentation materials. These are actually pretty good, I said, flipping through the charts. You do decent work when you're motivated. What's your point? My point is that I'm offering you a choice. You can keep your job, rebuild your career, and maybe even earn back some respect, or you can walk away and start over somewhere else. He stared at me. You're serious? After everything that's happened, you'd let me keep working for you. Under certain conditions. What conditions? First, you work twice as hard as everyone else. You're starting from the bottom now, regardless of your title. Second, you treat every employee with respect, especially the ones you might be tempted to push around. Third, you never lie to me again. And if I agree to this, then you get to keep your job, your salary, and your dignity. What's left of it? Marlow was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not quite humility, but maybe the beginning of it. Why? He asked. Because I'm not you. I don't get satisfaction from destroying people. I get satisfaction from building things. Even after what I did? Especially after what you did. Anyone can kick someone when they're down. It takes character to help them back up. He nodded slowly. What about Kalia? What about her? Are you going to do to her what you did to me? I considered the question. Kalia made her choice. She chose a lifestyle over a marriage, ambition over loyalty, and money over love. Now she gets to live with those choices. She's staying at a motel? I know. She's scared. She should be. For the first time in her life, she's facing real consequences for her actions. My phone rang. Devon. Hayes, you need to know something. Kalia's been asking around about you. Specifically, she's been trying to find out how much money you inherited. How much does she know? Enough to be dangerous. She's also been talking to Rebecca Stone about challenging the inheritance somehow. I looked at Marlow, who was obviously listening to my side of the conversation. Thanks for the heads up. I'll handle it. I hung up and turned back to Marlow. It looks like your girlfriend isn't ready to accept her new circumstances. She's not my girlfriend anymore. What? She left this morning, said she needed time to think about her options. Where did she go? I don't know. She took her car and said she'd be in touch. This was an interesting development. Kalia on her own was potentially more dangerous than Kalia with Marlow. Desperate people make unpredictable choices. Marlow, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Did you and Kalia ever discuss doing anything illegal to get money from me? Insurance fraud, false accusations, anything like that? His face went white. Why would you ask that? Because I know Kalia, and I know she's not going to just accept being poor. She's going to try something. She mentioned some things, but I told her it was a bad idea. What kind of things? She thought maybe she could claim you'd been abusive, get a restraining order, make you look bad in court. And I told her it would never work. You're not that kind of person, and everyone knows it. I nodded. What else? She talked about the inheritance, whether there might be a way to prove you'd hidden assets during the marriage. Anything else? Marlow hesitated. She asked me if I thought you might have an accident. The room went very quiet, except for the rain against the windows. An accident? She didn't mean it. She was just angry and scared and not thinking clearly. Marlow, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If Kalia contacts you, if she asks you to do anything, if she even suggests meeting somewhere, you call me immediately. You think she'd actually try something? I think she's a woman who's used to getting what she wants, and for the first time in her life, that's not happening. People like that can be dangerous when they're cornered. I gathered up my papers and headed for the door. Hayes, Marlow called after me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About everything. I know you are. The question is whether you're sorry because you got caught or sorry because you hurt people. Both, I think. And then maybe there's hope for you after all. I left the warehouse and drove home through the storm, thinking about Kalia and what she might be planning. Devin was right to be concerned. I'd been so focused on the chess game that I might have overlooked the possibility that one of the pieces might flip over the board. At home, I poured myself a drink and called Gina Morrison. "I may have a problem," I said. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves my ex-wife and potentially false accusations." "What do you need?" "I need to make sure I'm protected, legally, financially, and maybe physically." "I can handle the legal and financial protection. For the physical part, you might want to call your friend Devin." "Already on it." I hung up and called Devin, who answered on the first ring. "Let me guess," he said. "Kalia's gone off the reservation." "How did you know?" "Because I've been a cop, and I know how these things go. The victim gets some power back, the perpetrator gets desperate, and suddenly everyone's in danger. What do you recommend?" "I recommend you take a vacation, somewhere far away, until this blows over." "I'm not running away from Kalia." "Hayes, you've won. You got your revenge, you proved your point, and you came out on top. Don't let pride turn victory into disaster." "It's not about pride. It's about finishing what she started." "And what if finishing it gets you hurt, or worse? Then at least I'll go down fighting instead of running." Devin sighed. "You're not the same guy I had drinks with 2 weeks ago." "No, I'm not. 2 weeks ago I was someone who let people walk all over him. Now I'm someone who walks back. Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was a promise I could keep. Kalia had started this game, and I intended to finish it. The storm was getting worse outside, and I had the feeling it was going to be a long night. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street at midnight. Come alone. K." I stared at the message for a long time, then forwarded it to Devin and Gina. Then I checked my watch. It was 9:30 p.m. Time to end this once and for all. The warehouse on 5th Street was one of mine, purchased through Mountain Ridge Property Services 3 days earlier. It was empty, isolated, and exactly the kind of place where someone might try something stupid. I arrived at 11:45, parking across the street where I could watch the building. Kalia's car was already there, parked near the side entrance. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the kind of humidity that comes after a storm. I called Devin. "I'm here." "Hayes, this is a bad idea." "Probably, but I'm doing it anyway." "I'm 5 minutes out. Wait for me." "No, this is between me and her." I hung up and walked across the street to the warehouse. The side door was unlocked. Inside, emergency lighting cast long shadows across the empty space. Kalia was standing in the center of the room, and she wasn't alone. 2 men I didn't recognize were with her, both wearing the kind of clothes that suggested they weren't here for a business meeting. "Hello, Hayes," Kalia said. "Thanks for coming." "Kalia, and friends. Just some people who owe me a favor." I looked around the warehouse, noting the exits and the security cameras I'd had installed. "What do you want?" "I want what's mine." "Which is?" "Half of everything. The inheritance, the businesses, all of it." "We've been through this. The inheritance isn't marital property." "Maybe not legally, but morally? I was your wife for 12 years. I deserve something." "You got something. You got exactly what you chose." One of the men stepped forward. He was big, with the kind of build that comes from lifting weights in prison. "Lady says you owe her money," he said. "We're here to collect." "And if I refuse?" "Then things get unpleasant." I smiled, and apparently it wasn't the reaction they were expecting. "You know what's funny?" I said. 2 weeks ago this might have worked. 2 weeks ago I would have been terrified. I would have given you whatever you wanted just to avoid trouble." "Smart man," the second guy said. "But 2 weeks ago, I was a different person. I was someone who believed that if you played by the rules, treated people with respect, and worked hard, everything would work out. I started walking toward them, and they actually took a step back. Then I learned that some people don't play by the rules. Some people take advantage of kindness, mistake decency for weakness, and think they can get away with anything because their victims won't fight back." The lights suddenly came on, flooding the warehouse with bright white illumination. At the same time, the sound system activated, filling the space with the recording of Kalia's phone conversation from 2 weeks earlier. "No, Marlow, he doesn't suspect anything. Hayes is too wrapped up in his little computer projects to notice what's right in front of him." Kalia's face went white as her own voice echoed through the warehouse. "I know, baby, I know. Just a few more weeks, and I'll have everything sorted out. The divorce papers are already drawn up. Trust me, he won't fight it. Hayes never fights for anything." The 2 men looked at each other, suddenly uncertain. "You see, gentlemen," I said, still walking toward them, The lady here has a history of underestimating people. She thought I was weak, stupid, and helpless. She was wrong about all three. The warehouse doors burst open, and Devin entered with 2 uniformed police officers. "Hayes Rellin?" one of the officers called out. "That's me. We got your call about the extortion attempt." I pulled out my phone and showed them the text message. "My ex-wife lured me here with these 2 gentlemen to demand money." The officers looked at Kalaya and her companions. "Is this true, ma'am?" "It's not what it looks like," Kalaya said desperately. "This is all a misunderstanding." "The kind of misunderstanding that involves threatening someone for money?" Devin asked. "We weren't threatening anyone," the first man said, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. "Really? Because we have the whole conversation on tape." I gestured to the security cameras positioned around the warehouse. "This building has a very sophisticated surveillance system." The officers spent the next hour taking statements and reviewing the security footage. In the end, they arrested Kalaya and her 2 friends on charges of attempted extortion and criminal conspiracy. As they led her away in handcuffs, Kalaya looked back at me one last time. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." Devin and I stood in the empty warehouse, watching the police cars drive away. "So what now?" he asked. "Now I go back to my life." "Which life is that? The old one or the new one?" I thought about it for a moment. "The real one. The one where I don't let people walk all over me, but I don't go looking for fights either." "And Marlow?" "Marlow gets to prove whether he's learned anything from this experience." "You really think people can change?" "I think people can choose to change. Whether they actually do it is up to them." We walked out of the warehouse together into the clear night air that comes after a storm has passed. In the distance, I could see the lights of the city, full of people living their lives, making their choices, and dealing with the consequences. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The game was over, and I had won. But more importantly, I had learned something about myself that I never would have discovered if Kalia and Marlow hadn't pushed me to the breaking point. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, smarter than people assumed, and capable of things I never imagined. And that, more than any revenge, was worth everything I'd been through. As Devin and I drove away from the warehouse, my phone buzzed with a message from Gina Morrison. "All legal matters resolved. Congratulations on your new life." I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow, I would go back to running my company, managing my investments, and building something better than what I'd lost. But tonight, I was just going to go home and enjoy the silence.